So in the last video, we learned about alerts and console.logs, built-in JavaScript functions to actually show stuff in the browser. In this video, we are going to talk about how we store data and use it. So we went over the data types in an earlier video, but you're probably thinking at this point, it's great that there's all these data types, but obviously there's probably going to be the case that I want to store data somewhere and then use it somewhere else. In programming, we use what are called variables to achieve this. And what variables are basically little spots of or little locations in memory that we can put values into. We can put strings, we can put numbers, booleans, all the data types we've covered so far can be stored in variables. So the way we go about writing variables, there are 3 keywords that we can use. So there is the var keyword, the let keyword, and the const keyword. And each of these keywords are going to do the same thing in terms of storing a value in a place in memory, with some slight variations. And one thing I want to note to you is that the var keyword is older JavaScript. So var was the original way to declare variables, and everything before ES6 you had to use vars to declare variables. Lets and consts are ES6 plus, or ES 2015 if you recall my JavaScript versions video. So these weren't available until 2015, and they are now the most common way to write variables. And oftentimes you won't even see var used anymore, but for historical context, it's important to know it, and you'll find old code bases that certainly do use it. So let's actually see a variable used in action. One other thing of note, real quick, and this is a very important concept. If you come from another programming language, Java or C++, you might remember that when you declared variables in those languages, that you had to include the types. So instead of something like var letter const, you would have an int or a double or a float or a string. There's no such thing in JavaScript. Even though JavaScript's aware of those data types, you do not have to declare them when you're declaring variables. JavaScript is what is known as a weakly typed language versus a strongly typed language. So you can store any type with these three keywords. So strings, numbers, booleans, nulls, it doesn't matter. You can get put in vars, lets, or consts. So let's see how we can declare a variable. So declaring a variable is as simple as giving it a name. And oftentimes that name is going to be representative of something. So if we have var let's do birth year, we can store a number in there. So I'm not going to put my real birth year, but I can put 1988. So what we see here is we have, whenever we make a variable, we give it a name, and this name is going to be whatever the data represents. You can name it literally whatever you want. I could have put something like x equals 1988, but that doesn't help me later down the line. I want to know, when I see a name birth year later in my code, I should know, oh hey, that's probably representative of some sort of birth year. If I just see an x, I might say, what the hell is an x, right? So birth year, name, you'll see, is hungry, all kinds of different things. Let's do that one for the next one. So var birth year is the declaration, equals 1988 is the assignment. This says, hey, take this value and assign it to the birth year. To see another example, I just said the is hungry name, and when you see something like that, you could think the data type of a Boolean, right? So you might disagree with me on this, but you could either be hungry or not hungry. You might say, oh, you could be kind of hungry or not, but let's just, for sake of ease, you can be hungry or not. So we can say let hungry is true. Let is hungry equals true. And so one note, you don't have to both declare and assign a value on the same line. It's most often the case of what you'll be doing, but if you find the need to, you can also make a variable you can make a variable and then assign it on a different line. The only difference is that when you reference that variable again, you do not need to use the keyword var, let, or const. So the only exception to that, and we're going to talk about now, is the const keyword, which stands for constant. So when I declare a const variable, and let's say let's reuse our birth year example, because birth year is something that's unlikely to change. I can't change my birth year. When I assign it, when I declare it, I need to assign it a value because I can no longer change that value later down the line. If I try something like this, and then run this program, you're going to see an error in the console. So if we pull up the console, it says assignment to a constant variable. You cannot assign values to a constant variable except when you declare them. So that is what makes a constant variable unique from a let or a var. Lets and vars are very similar, and they can be reassigned. There are only slight differences, which I'll talk about later. So const stands for constant, and it means you cannot change the value of that variable once you set it. And you have to set it in the declaration. All right, cool. So moving forward with our examples, once we've declared a variable, so let's go back to the birth year one. We can use that value anywhere in our code after we declare it. So before, we were just console logging and alerting hard values that were plugged into the parentheses. Well, we can also alert variables. And what this does is shows JavaScript goes line by line. We declare the constant variable birth year and assign it a value of 1984. And then when we get to this line, JavaScript says, oh, we're alerting something, and we're alerting birth year. And so birth year is not a string. There aren't any quotes around it. So JavaScript says, okay, this must be a variable. Let me see if they've declared it and used it and given it a value. So they go online, JavaScript scans through the code, finds this variable birth year and says, okay, here's the variable. What's its value? 1984? Then that's the value I'm going to use in this alert. And once we refresh, we'll see 1984. We can use this to great advantage. So one thing we often do with alerts and console logs is we don't want to just alert values. We might want to tell the user something. We might say something like, my birth year is, and then the way we would combine that string with that value is with a plus, and this is called concatenation. So we can tack on this birth year to the end of the string and alert it to the page. So my birth year is 1984. Likewise, for any variables that aren't constant variables, we can make a whole statement in JavaScript. So just as another example, my name is, this is a string, whoops, I need a name for my variable. This is a string, my name is, and we can add more to that variable. We can say something like statement equals statement plus Michael. And what this does is says, hey, take this statement variable and assign it the value of whatever the value of statement was before, which is my name is, and then add this on at the very end. So that's concatenation again. And if we console log statement, this is the alert, and then the console log prints here, line 15. You realize I'm doing the same thing on line 5. But on line 5, I'm printing a whole string, whereas on line 15, I'm printing this variable, which is this, gets Michael concatenated onto the end of it, and then when we log it, we look up what the end value is. The end value is this plus this. Okay, so that's concatenation in action. And that's a pretty good summary of variables. So let me know if you have any questions. Hop onto the Slack channel, so shoot me an email, and I'll see you in the next video.